Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Great to have you with us here for another final presentation. This time, it's for part of Berend on his analysis of the reforestation for the Atandawa irrigation water system. This project has been fascinating because we've had many people over the last few years who have come and wanted to plant trees. Berend wanted to come to do the maybe less glamorous, but arguably equally, if not more important part, which is the assessment and making sure that the work that we've done here is able to make an impact and is able to make a difference. So we did our presentation to the community last night, which was well received, and we're really looking forward to be able to take this information as a critical turning point to be able to decide how we go forwards. And Tabe, it's great to have you here as well, because I think you will be picking up the torch from Berend in terms of making the plans for the next steps. So I will leave it over to you, Berend. Take it away.
All right. Okay, my presentation should be on the screen now.
Yep.
Nacer, get out of here. Okay, so hi, nice to meet everyone. My name is Berend. I have.
You've just gone on to mute.
Okay, is my presentation still? Okay. Okay, yeah. I study international land and water management at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. And I've been in Ecuador for 4 months, where I had the opportunity to meet everyone, travel this amazing country, get familiar with the culture, and get familiar with the trees. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of context. Altarena worked together with other organizations to plant 20,000 trees. The planting took place last year and the year before that, so 2024, 2025. They worked with other organizations such as the provincial government, the Prefectura, charities such as Foundation Care, but also with schools and other local community organizations. Trees were planted in Atandawa, San Juan, Cochabamba, and Rio Alto. And the primary objectives of the project were to conserve water and improve biodiversity. Now, why here? Here you have a map of the area. Atandawa is at the bottom where I am now. Everything is part of the same catchment in irrigation system. The white line on the map represents the irrigation system, and the entire valley kind of feeds into this. The communities are linked through their water. Now, like many places in Ecuador, this has severe droughts have been a big problem, which has been a cause for much concern. It has been difficult to grow crops which are really valuable. Farmers report that their soil is tired, it's depleted. And in the province of Bolivar, only 14% of the province is still native forest, and 20% of that was lost over the last 10 years. So deforestation is a serious and ongoing problem. Most people here are subsistence farmers. They rely entirely or mostly on farming as their way of income, but they depend now on unpredictable climate. And the current land and water use does not protect them against climate shocks. It does not make them resilient against these kind of changes. And following this, trees can be a solution. They can provide economic benefits, environmental benefits, they improve the ecosystem, and all in all, they are an obvious solution to address this. All right, so the goal of my project was evaluate the project, find out what went well, what went wrong, gain the perspective of the beneficiaries, that being the farmers, understanding their challenges and their hopes for the future, and based on that, write a report. So my methodology, I have 3 steps. Step 1, do literary research. So I wanted to understand what was actually planted, understanding their benefits, and make myself familiar with native trees. For that, I reviewed organization documents. I did a lot of literature research. I talked to Sebastian, an expert from the organization, and I compiled an entire list of trees. Now here we have some examples of trees. This is Aliso, Alnus ocumata, a native tree. This is Acacia, non-native from Australia. And this is Nogal, also known as Andean walnut or Juglans neotropica. Step 2. I surveyed farmers and did site visits. So the goal was to collect data on the success of the trees, ask them for their views on the reforestation project, understand what their priorities are in the future, and ask about the problems faced by, I'm not sure why it says female, ask about the problems faced by all farmers. So I designed a questionnaire, I coordinated site visits with community leaders, and I went to the site and carried out the survey. And here's some pictures interviewing Maria from Cochabamba. And this was a really interesting experience to go into the mountains and really talk to the people rather than just relying on what was documented. My final step was participatory mapping. My goal was to gain additional input on environmental problems, especially on the spatial level, get a ranking of problems and solutions from community members, and using a participatory and engaging approach to kind of workshop together on the future. So I prepared maps, I prepared a scientific methodology with clear questions, and prepare a presentation of the results so far so that the members had a context to work in. And then I hosted and ran the workshop and finally analyzed the results. Here are some pictures from that. Here's a picture, yeah. Okay, so my results. Step 1, the trees. Okay, we know that 20,000 trees were planted, half of them in San Juan, then 5,500 in Cochabamba and Rio Alto, and then the rest in Atacama. And Altamira planted 38 different species. That is a lot. But I compiled it out into a big data sheet based on the local names, such as Aliso or Pumamaki. I did research, found their actual scientific names so that I can understand if they're native or not, understand their benefits according to ecosystem services. And by doing this, I had a complete data set of everything that was planted, which we can also use going forward. Now, native trees. Well, only about 2/3 were native trees, such as Aliso, Pumamaki, Nogale, Chicharron, Polylepis, and Cholon. But we also planted not native trees, that is acacias, willow, alder, or cepilo blanco or rojo. Now, I say tree, but there's a bit more than just trees. We have regular trees, the 2/3, but also fruit trees, fruit bushes, or medicinal plants. But the majority were, of course, trees. Now, I made a big list of everything. You can see that the most common were Aliso, Cucarda, Iguaron, Chicharron, and Agenias, but there were also a lot where just 10, 50, 100 trees of that species were planted. Now, I visited 18 different sites, which represented 1,300 trees, or about 6.5% of everything. I went to Atandawa, Cochabamba, and Rio Alto. Here's, for example, a picture of a water source in Rio Alto with a fence around it. Here's some more pictures. Another water source. This is also Rio Alto, I think. But we found out that most of the trees had died. That is 75 to 80% of the trees had died. On the right, you see a picture of a stick that was once a tree. Now it is no longer. But a few species did succeed, such as Acacia, Aliso, Chicharron, Nogal, and Pumamaki. Now, why did the trees die? Well, there's a lot of different answers to this. Maybe the saplings were too small, or the species cannot tolerate the altitude or the amount of water. The saplings came from tree nurseries at lower altitudes, and so if they were moved to high altitudes, this new stress, they might have not survived that. And the winter or summer might have been too harsh. Maybe there was too much water as the trees were planted next to the water source and their roots rotted. Or maybe they didn't get enough water and died. Or cows ate the trees because farmers did not keep them away from them. A few cases, pesticide had killed the trees because a farmer had applied them to kill pests, but also killing the tree. And about half the cases, the farmers reported that neighbors had either stolen or removed the trees for various reasons. Now, so this is not super positive, but the good thing is there's a lot to be learned. We have a lot more knowledge on what does work. And taking that forward, I wanted to understand, okay, we need to understand the challenges that farmers are facing. Because if we understand their challenges, we can design a solution that is meeting their needs and is thus more likely to succeed. So I interviewed farmers. I interviewed 14 different farmers. The average age was 53 and was about equal on gender. Now, I categorized their livelihood challenges in 4 categories: natural, human, financial, and physical, with natural, financial, and human being the most common. Now, environmental livelihood challenges. By far, the most common was not enough water, followed not closely by not enough trees, reliance on chemical fertilizer and pesticides, soil degradation, and things of that nature. This makes it clear water is the #1 priority of the farmers, and that makes sense. Now, financial challenges, it was a bit split. The most common was the lack of good employment opportunities and the lack of financial resources, as well as the fact that farming is not financially viable for the farmers. What happens is that because the soil is so tired, everyone grows kind of the same crops because that's the only thing that grows, primarily corn and beans and potatoes. But because everyone grows the same things, they sell for very little, and if they're lucky to make any money on it. Lastly, on human livelihood challenges, #1 by far was migration, which is a big problem in Ecuador, followed by lack of agricultural education and cohesion of the communities. Now, what does this all mean? We'll get to that in a moment. I also asked them, hey, imagine these trees are alive, and imagine it's 10, 20 years from now and they're big trees. Now, what are you hoping to get from it? What benefits do you hope to get? Now, I expected water to be super common, and it is the #1. Surprisingly, the return of birds, or birds in general, was also just as common in water. And I suspect that is because it's quite a visible problem. You know, one day you have birds, and 20 years later, after you've grown up, there's no birds anymore. Unlike something like contamination of water or problems with the soil, it's a very visible problem. But after birds and watermelon, we have wind protection, aesthetic or ornamental reasons, food, cultural educational values, and fuel for fires, building materials, and less common was soil quality and water quality and such. Now, then I did participatory mapping, which is a method where you ask the communities to, on a map, kind of discuss ideas, draw, to kind of have an engaging and collaborative method of working together. And so I asked them, hey, can you, after drawing some key landmarks, like, hey, can you write down the problems that you're facing in your communities? And later, then, can you rank these problems? What's the most important? What's the least important? And then, okay, well, we've talked about these problems. What kind of solutions do you think are important, and what is the most important? Now, some pictures from that event. And the maps, I'm not going to go over them too much, but what I found most interesting was this connection between the problems of Atandara, which is lower and at the end of the watershed, and the problems at the top, Cochipama and Dar Alto, where Atandara is kind of the accumulator of problems because they rely on water from the higher up regions. If there's a problem there, such as contamination, it all ends up with them. This dichotomy between like top and bottom was revealed with this map, which I found really interesting. Now, just as with the interviews, the map also said water quantity and quality is the biggest problem, especially contamination of water, followed by drought, which is roughly the same thing, followed by deforestation as a general problem, and then finally the lack of employment opportunities and the fact that agriculture is not financially viable. Now, what does this all mean? Now, putting this all together, We know the problems that people are facing. We know what kind of benefits are to get. We know what kind of solutions are most important to them. And based on that, I designed two kind of possible ideas for the future. Solution one is continue protecting water sources, but not just the water sources. Before, there was a fence put at around 5 meters away from the water source, trees put inside, and that was it. I would recommend following up the trees along the entire length of the river, so that it's protected along its entire edge. And we can plant trees that absorb or purify water. The best one is Pumamaki, grows quickly, cleans water, absorbs clouds, but also Tilo, Chicharron, Nogal, Aliso are good opportunities. Now that would look like this. There's actually a river here in this little divot in the landscape. And it would be great if there was a small patch of forest here to kind of catch water, protect it against contamination from fertilizers, pesticides, stuff like that, but also against cows. Okay. Solution two is a bit more ambitious. We can do work to restore cloud forests. Now, all the Andes used to be a big forest, but a lot of it has been lost for human activity, primarily farming and pasture. Now, what we can do is try to restore a bit of that by creating the cloud forest at the top of the mountains using aliso, acacia, polylepis, nogal, pumamaki, and shrubs. By doing this, we create a forest that catches clouds. It will catch a lot of water, replenish the water in the water sources, and create a native habitat for the birds. This can be combined with agroforestry, for example, with the native tree capuli or pear. This can also be a form of economic development because, of course, losing land for a forest does not provide immediate benefits for the farmer. But if we combine it in agroforestry in the long term, this will make a greater impact for everyone. That can look like this. The entire top part of each mountain, a forest, will cause to catch water and flow down, essentially. Now, why must we do something? I wouldn't be here if there wasn't a problem. And I think a good example of the consequences of climate change and why it's important that we do something is something called the Super El Nino. Now, El Nino is a climate pattern between rainy years and really dry years. And currently, Ecuador is going into a Super El Nino. I felt this myself. It's supposed to have rained for the last month, or still be some rain, but there's been almost none. If I play this video, you can see the hot sea come to Ecuador, and it ended just last week. Now, what does this mean? We can expect a super strong drought with no water for this year and the next in the summer. And this can be the worst El Nino that we've ever measured. But because of climate change, perhaps in 5 or 10 years, we'll get an even worse El Nino, which is why it's important that we do something to protect ourselves against the consequences of climate change, and why it's important that we take sustainable choices for our livelihoods and for everyone. Now, reason number two, a lot of Ecuador, and especially the Andes, has been part of mining concessions, which means that the communities of Cochabamba, Rio Alto, San Juan, etc., are all part of the same big mining concession since 2018. Now, currently they're not mining, but if they ever want to try to get the gold, silver, and copper, it can be a really big problem. The mining can ruin the water for everyone. People's livelihoods will be destroyed, and people will have to leave. So it's really important that people work together to prevent this, because this can be a disaster, and it's a very real and very serious threat. Now, there's some good news. It is possible to kind of stop this. One of the key things is working together, not just as one community, but as everyone in the area, and be like, okay, we're not going to sell lands to the mining corporation. We're not going to allow them to mine in our area. And now, to foster this kind of community cooperation, I think a sustainable project for the future of everyone in the area makes a lot of sense. Now, what is next? Now, yesterday I hosted a final event where we invited community members from the university as well, the provincial government, everyone to come to discuss. The University of Prefectura also presented some projects. And based on this, we try to get, a step forward. Like we have to act, and we have to act now. I have to act this year, and I'm hoping that in the context of my work, communities can carry on, can see the importance, and we can work together for the future. So we also have, for example, from the Prefectura present. Now, lastly, I made a report on my results with all my findings, my detailed recommendations for what a successful project looks like, as well as a timeline. Yeah, that is about it. Any questions?
Thank you, Berend. Great. I love the clarity on the presentation. So yeah, there's now an opportunity open for any questions, any comments from anyone who's here. Maybe I'll make a beginning, and then if anybody wants to put their digital hand up and let us know if they want to speak. Can you explain a little bit more about the presentation that you did yesterday? What kind of outcomes and what you think in terms of maybe milestones over the next few months could look like if, we could bring everybody to the table and access the resources necessary?
So I think there is a consensus that something needs to be done. I think the difficult things are always who's going to do something, what is the funding going to look like. Now we invited NGOs as well to participate as they have the funding, but they were not there yesterday, but they might be here tomorrow. Now, I think the key next step is get everyone around the table. That is the communities, the partners from the Prefectura, and the NGOs, and LTD. Now, okay, what can we do? What should we do? And how might we do it? If that can be confirmed and the communities say, okay, we want another project, we think this is a good idea, let's do something, then it can go pretty fast. In the next 3 months, someone needs to design. I presented 2 solutions. Someone needs to either pick, change, or make something new. Secure funding, secure trees, secure all the extra documents, monitoring plans. If we have that in 3 months, and the community say, yeah, let's do this, then planting of trees can begin in October. But it's very important that we do this carefully. But if we do that, then I think it's entirely possible that even this year, it's already in the next step of the project.
And is there anything that you would suggest for Vea coming in just a few weeks' time? What would you suggest her focus should be on?
I would start with getting the communities on board. I think that's the most difficult step. My advice would be go to the communities and host a town hall meeting where everyone in the community is invited and try to get decisions made, agreements signed between the partners. As soon as the agreements are ready and there's a plan, everything can move. But until then, until the communities and the partners and the fundings are on the same page, we cannot move. And that is the key next step.
Thank you. Adriana, you've got a question.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the solutions that you proposed. They both seem quite interesting and they both seem to tackle quite an important aspect of the livelihoods there. I'm just wondering, since as you presented, El Nino is coming for us all, the super El Nino, I wonder, since there is this time limit and trees need to grow, do you have, for example, a preference in mind on what to prioritize when planting these trees, in the sense of which solution would be best to prioritize and minimize the damage from El Nino? So either the planting trees around the river or the cloud forest solution.
So the current El Nino is already here. It cannot be prevented, and it's gonna be difficult. But by the time we start planting trees, which could be October, winter will start. There will be rains again, so that's an opportunity. Now, as for my preference, I think if we really really want to make a difference, and in 10 years we can look back and like, hey, we came together and we solved this. There are other examples of this kind of community cooperation in Ecuador, such as Salinas, and I think solution 2 is the best. I think long term for everyone, it will make a really great impact. The difficult thing is the land is currently owned by farmers, by people. How do you get them to either buy in, or how do you get the funding to buy the land and do it? And that is an unresolved question. But I think without ambition, we're just kind of running after the facts rather than facing the challenge head on. And I think with how intense climate change has become and what an impact it has made on people's lives here and how dependent they are on the climate and the seasons, I think ambition is the only way to really make a difference. Because as we saw with the last 2 years, it has kind of not succeeded. And I think we need to dream bigger than a few trees and a few resources.
Thank you.
Just to add to that, yeah, it's a difficult and complicated situation. I think in terms of El Nino, as Berend says, it's too late to plant trees now because we're now in the dry season. What was really interesting yesterday is when the technical guy came from the prefectura and did his presentation on forest fires. We had a lot of forest fires a couple of years ago, and actually that can completely wipe out a whole region and however many trees have been planted. So I think one of the most urgent things is how can we try and reduce those risks, because that's the most urgent and imminent threat. Most of these forest fires happen when people have got some leftover agricultural waste, so like corn stalks and stuff like that. They pile them together and then they set fire to them. And what happens is when we have sun here, we have a lot of wind. So all you need is a few of those to be taken off and taken into a dry, bushy area, and they can just really set everything on fire. So that's going to be something that's really, I would say, in terms of urgency, is really up there. And then what's interesting is I think that while I'm already concerned about what this summer's going to look like, there's also an opportunity. There's an opportunity in when people are looking down the barrel of a gun, when they're actually experiencing the pain of all of this happening. If done right, it can be used as the fuel to do something about it. So if we can make sure that we're organized, we have the partners in place, going through a difficult summer might be what we need to actually get people organized and get people around the table and looking for solutions. So I really hope that, we can move stuff in the right direction. But one of the other complicated things is I totally agree. Wow, if it was my land, I would reforest all of the tops of the hills again. Because of the agrarian reform in 1970, that used to all be forest. But what the government said is you can claim any of that common land as long as you make it productive. And now that's farmers' land that they use for their livelihoods. And therefore, taking it away completely is going to be very challenging because there's not much motivation for them. The farmers themselves who own that land, they're not going to be benefiting so much from the water. It's actually the villages further down the mountain who can take advantage of that water as well. There's also a lot of misconceptions about trees providing too much shade, which is going to affect them growing crops, among other things. So it's a very complicated situation, and the saying is that the soft skills or the hard skills, or the soft, and actually being able to socialize the projects and the needs with the communities who've got a very different worldview is often where we find the largest barriers, rather than the technical solutions themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. I think now what I thought of, and what also came out of participatory mapping and was named by a lot of farmers during my interviews, I asked them, hey, imagine we do this reforestation project again, what would you want? And a lot of them said fruit trees. And on the solutions of what do we need to do, what should we do, fruit trees was also highly listed. Then, to me, doing some agroforestry can still be an opportunity for the landowner. Now, I'm not sure if that is more or less viable than what they're currently growing. But if they're growing potatoes, they're not making any money. So potentially, it can be an opportunity to kind of diversify income, as we see in Salinas. But the convincing the farmer is always the hardest part.
Any other questions?
Are there any fruit trees that would survive the heat? Like any reasons?
The heat, well, I think with fruit trees, it is important to take care of them a bit more, unlike regular trees. It's important that during the summer, you water and you keep them fed. Now, in my design, I've included several steps of monitoring after planting, like 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, as well as information for the farmer, like, okay, you've received trees, great. How can we make sure that they don't die? If done well, there are fruit trees that grow at this altitude, such as capulli, and they can be an opportunity, but they're always a more longer term investment.
Thank you, Matthew.
Hi. Considering the severe drought that will happen this year and over the next years, have you thought about something where we could store the water, where we could keep the water during winter, and so that we can use it during the drought, like short-term solution? Is that something you have thought about?
Short term, actually, this is a question I've had myself as well. There's so much rain for 6 months, and there's almost none for the other 6. Now, there's two answers to this. I'm gonna mute you. There's 2 answers to this. Number one, we work with nature. Now, a lot of farmers have reported that a lot of water sources have dried up over the last years, and now they're trying their best to keep what is left. Now, where do the water sources get their water from? From underground. Where does underground come from? From the sky. So if we want there to be water, even during the dry seasons, one of the key steps is making sure that there's a lot of water in the ground. So we do that by creating recharge zones such as the cloud forest. Now, that is, of course, more long-term thinking. Short-term, you can think of rainwater harvesting tanks, other ways of capturing clouds, such as with plastic sheets, which is done in some other parts of Ecuador. Depending on the solution, this can be expensive or temporary, but it can work. However, I think it's really difficult to bridge the gap of 6 months with just some concrete tanks. I think the scale that you need is a bit challenging to really, with reasonable funding, design a solution. I think there it can help, and certainly everyone should have some kind of rainwater harvesting system, even if it's just for home water use. But when we're talking about the water that people depend on for their livelihood, for farming, for irrigation, I do not see a possibility of doing that with purely technical solutions with building infrastructure. I think that has to work together with the natural water cycle.
There is one short-term opportunity that actually you can only do in the summer, which is, so there's all of these different water sources that convene down in one lake, and that's the beginning of the irrigation system. When Berend first arrived, we went to go and look at that water source, and a lot of it has got marsh, and basically that space could be expanded. So you could dredge it, you could take out some of the earth, some of the plants. When we look at it, it is a habitat to a degree. We saw some ducks, I think, there when we were there. So you wouldn't want to completely destroy it. But there are some opportunities, especially because it's right next to the main road. where you could take out a significant amount of earth, and then you could actually expand the volume of water that could be stored there. When we spoke to the prefectura, they said that would be possible, but you could only actually do it in the dry season when the water level is lower.
Yeah, I agree. That is a possible solution. However, I think a side note for me is that this can definitely help, but there's about 70 people who benefit from the irrigation system, and there's about 2,000 in the entire area. Secondly, the irrigation system and the way water is distributed as it's currently is flawed. I'm not so sure the water would either be distributed fairly or a lot wouldn't go to waste. I think it's a viable solution. I don't see a reason not to do it. But it only helps some people somewhat.
Absolutely agreed. Yeah, it doesn't support the people who have the water sources themselves and those farms. It benefits the people who are on the irrigation system.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Chris, algo que quieres preguntar o comentar sobre lo que has visto trabajando con Berend en este mes?
La verdad que en general sobre la presentación que de ayer, la verdad muy bueno. Voy a hacer como una reflexión un poco. Fue un trabajo increíble que ha venido desarrollando en los 4 meses. Me parece muy importante por el tema de la reforestación y el tema del agua. Lastimosamente, creo que nosotros nos estamos dando cuenta aquí en Atandagua. Yo no vivo aquí, pero en este mes que he estado, pues sí se siente bastante, ¿no? El cambio climático que existe. Justamente uno de los trabajadores Mesías de ayer mencionaba que somos la primera generación que estamos como que ya viendo el cambio climático, pero a partir de ahí es muy importante el determinar qué pasos vamos a desarrollar o realizar para en adelante para tomar medidas y ser como más responsables con este tema del cambio climático. Si bien es un trabajo bastante grande, pero creo que por algo se empieza siempre, ¿no? Y trabajar con Berend, pues ha sido increíble. Creo que es uno de los pasantes que ha sabido como facilitar bastante el trabajo, muy inteligente, muy activo, con mucho entusiasmo y eso es algo bueno para mí como coordinador de los pasantes, de los investigadores que se encuentran aquí en el terreno. Y nada, ha sido todo un gusto, Berend, y te vamos a extrañar ahora que te nos vayas. Eso, Josh.
So Chris, who's been supporting Berend in his project, has said that he doesn't live in this region. He works here, but he's from a different part, and you really feel the impact of climate change here. In particular, there was a comment which was said by the presentation from the guy from the prefectura, which was, we're the first generation to feel the impacts of climate change, and we're the last ones to be able to do anything about it, which really stuck with me as well. So he's really appreciated Berend being here, part of the project, very motivated, proactive, and intelligent, and he's been able to do some really important work here. So wants to congratulate you, Berend, on the work that you've done over the last 4 months.
Gracias, Christian.
Okay, last opportunity if there's any questions, comments. If not, I'd also like to congratulate you, Berend. As I said, people usually want to plant trees rather than count how many dead trees there are. And while it's been, obviously disappointing to hear about the survival rate of the trees, we need to collect this information. You know, we can live in a dream world of how many we planted and how great we are, but we need to have this critical thinking. We need to learn from it, and we need to improve for next time around. And this is a project. This is one of the main projects that we do here at El Terreno, and you've really got us to a focal point of where we need to move forwards and brought together some of the key actors. And this is certainly where we're at now as an organization. How can we link more with, obviously, the communities as beneficiaries, How can we link with local government who can help give us some technical knowledge, and more organize with the other NGOs who have got larger amounts of resources to be able to put towards a project. And the clarity that you communicated your work with, I think, has really got through to people. And as you were presenting, there were a lot of people nodding, and I think the message really got through. We're going to be going through a challenging few months, and I think this is, you know, putting it all under a magnifying glass about what needs to be done. So you've come at a perfect time, and obviously you're working off the back of Matthew, who was here a couple of years ago. So thank you. Really great to have you with us, Matthew, and for you sharing your experience here. And Terea, you're going to be with us here in a few weeks to be able to move this forward. So the gauntlet has been thrown down to you. And you've got maybe a little bit more of a sense of what awaits you. We're very much looking forward to having you here so we can take this project forward and continue to make an impact for low-income rural farmers here in the Ecuadorian Andes. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Really great to meet all of you. And if you're watching the recording of this and would like to find out more about the work that we do here at El Terreno, you can visit our website at www.elterrenoecuador.com. Thanks again to everybody. Wishing you all the best, and we'll be seeing you soon. Hasta luego.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
your
to be
time.
here. Bye bye.